You never forget the silence of a place like Silver Creek. It's the kind of quiet that doesn't comfort you. It studies you. The wind drags across miles of pine and wet stone, carrying the smell of rain and earth. In that corner of Washington, there's no cell service, no streetlights, no sound but the river clawing through the valley. And for most people, that's reason enough to stay away. But for Noah Grayson, it was home. He'd grown up there, on land his grandfather cleared with his own hands. A man of habits, early mornings, black coffee, and the hum of an old pickup truck that sounded like it was built from memories. Noah wasn't the type to make noise. People in town used to say he could fix a fence faster than he could start a conversation. They weren't wrong. After his divorce, he kept mostly to himself, living with his 3 kids on the edge of the Grayson property. Ella, the oldest at 10, was quiet like her father. Logan, 9, had that restless spark that made teachers nervous and parents tired. And Sophie, just 8, was the kind of child who could make a broken world look soft again. Noah taught them how to start fires in the rain, how to tell north from moss, how to track deer without leaving a print. He called it education. His ex-wife, Rachel Monroe, called it isolation. The truth was probably somewhere between the two. From the outside, the Graysons looked like the picture of self-reliance, a man raising his kids in peace, away from screens and traffic and everything ugly about the modern world. But under that quiet routine was something brittle. The kind of tension you only notice when it snaps. Their divorce had been bad. Not loud or dramatic, just cold. Rachel had fought for shared custody, and the court had split the time evenly. 2 weeks with her in Everbrook, 2 weeks with him in Silver Creek. But over time, 2 weeks started to mean whenever Noah felt like it. He'd cancel pickups at the last minute. He'd forget to answer calls. And when Rachel showed up unannounced, she'd find the gate locked and no sign of anyone inside. She started to believe Noah wasn't just keeping the kids off-grid, he was keeping them from her. Noah didn't see it that way. In his mind, the world outside was broken, too loud, too fast, too cruel. He wanted to raise his children somewhere real, somewhere pure. To him, Rachel's world, the one of grocery stores, therapy appointments, and fluorescent lights, was the fake one. And so, the distance between them became a canyon. By late fall, their arguments had turned into paperwork. Court dates. Accusations. Rachel's lawyer painted Noah as unstable, uncooperative, and emotionally unpredictable. Noah refused to show up to hearings, claiming he didn't owe explanations to bureaucrats who'd never built anything with their hands. But those words would later haunt him. Because a few weeks later, on December 10th, Noah told his parents he was taking the kids camping for the weekend. He didn't say where. That wasn't unusual. He'd done it before. But this time, he didn't come back. At first, no one panicked. Silver Creek was full of hunters and loners. A man disappearing for a few days didn't make headlines. It made sense. But by the 3rd day, something felt off. His old grey pickup was found parked along the rocky bank near the waterline. Keys under the mat. Doors unlocked. The children's car seats still strapped in the back. The police came out of habit, not urgency. They walked the shoreline, took a few photos, and figured he'd gone deeper into the woods. It wasn't until the 5th day that they called in the helicopters. Then came the search teams. Drones. Volunteers. For 19 days, they combed every ridge, creek bed, and ravine between Silver Creek and the old logging roads. They found footprints that went nowhere. Ash from fires too old to date. Empty soda cans that might have been anyone's. And still, no sign of Noah, or Ella, or Logan, or Sophie. Rachel broke down in front of the cameras. "If you're out there," she said, "please bring them home." It was the kind of story small towns don't recover from. The man who took his kids into the wild and never came back. Rumors started before the search ended, that they'd drowned, that they'd crossed into Canada, that maybe Noah had finally lost his mind. The sheriff's department filed the case as presumed drowned. The memorials were quiet. Candles by the water. Kids from Ella's old school leaving flowers at the fence. But 3 weeks later, on December 29th, everything changed. That night, just before dinner, Noah's mother looked out the window of the farmhouse, and there he was, walking up the driveway. Mud from his boots to his knees. The kids behind him, holding hands, tired but smiling. Noah's father nearly dropped his glass. "Where the hell have you been?" he asked. And Noah, in that flat calm way of his, said, "Camping. Told you I'd be back." The police showed up an hour later. They weren't angry at first, just relieved. But the tone shifted fast when they realized the search had cost over $300,000. Helicopters, boats, fuel, manpower. Noah shrugged it off. "Should have saved your gas," he told one of them. That didn't sit well. He was charged with wasting police resources, though it was mostly symbolic, a fine, a warning. But for Rachel, it wasn't enough. She saw it as proof of what she'd feared all along, that Noah didn't understand the danger he was putting the kids in. That this camping trip had been something darker, a test run. And in a way, she was right. Because 3 months later, he would vanish again. Looking back, it's hard to say if Noah planned any of it. Maybe it started as pride. Maybe desperation. Maybe both. But people who knew him, the ones who'd grown up in Silver Creek, said something changed in him after that December. He stopped coming into town. He sold his old rifle at a pawn shop for cash. Stopped using his credit card. One neighbor said she saw him teaching the kids how to move quietly through the brush, like ghosts, she said. Another remembered seeing a map pinned to the inside of his shed, the forest lines marked in red, circles drawn around streams and ridges, as if he were building a world within a world. By the time spring came, Noah Grayson wasn't a man anymore. He was a story. The kind that starts with love and ends with a headline. You could almost hear the forest breathing that winter, slow, cold, and secretive. It had been 3 months since Noah Grayson came back from his camping trip, and people in Silver Creek had started to forget. Or maybe they just wanted to. The newspapers called it the vanishing father, the man who disappeared with his kids and walked out of the woods 19 days later as if nothing happened. It made the front page once, then slipped below the fold. That's how stories fade in small towns, not with closure, but with fatigue. Noah didn't talk about it. He didn't explain where they'd gone or why. When the sheriff asked for details, he shrugged. "We were camping," he said, "just got turned around." That was the official version. But Rachel Monroe didn't buy it. To her, that trip wasn't a mistake, it was a rehearsal. She could feel it in the way he looked at her afterward, calm but detached, as if he'd already left again in his mind. And she was right. The second disappearance began quietly, the way a storm begins with a still sky. In the weeks before Christmas, Noah stopped answering calls. He pulled his kids out of their homeschooling network, saying he wanted to teach them from the land. He traded his last bit of savings for supplies: rope, canvas, canned food, water filters. Neighbors saw him loading his pickup before dawn, headlights cutting through the fog. The kids sat in the truck bed wrapped in blankets, half asleep, unaware they were watching their old lives shrink in the rearview mirror. That morning, he left the Grayson farmhouse and drove toward the Pine Hollow logging road, the kind of road that disappears into the map itself. He told his parents he'd be gone a few days. He never came back. At first, no one panicked. Again, it was like déjà vu, a strange calm laced with denial. The sheriff's department logged the report but didn't launch a search right away. After all, last time he'd walked back alive. Nobody wanted to burn through hundreds of thousands of dollars chasing a ghost who might stroll home next week. But days turned into weeks, and then months. When Noah missed a mandatory court hearing, the one about reimbursing the county for the previous rescue operation, a bench warrant was issued. That's when the tone changed from missing to wanted. Deputy Eli Turner was the first to say it out loud. "He's not lost," Turner told the press. "He's hiding." In February, a hunter found Noah's old truck abandoned along Marrow Ridge Road. The cab was clean, too clean. No personal items, no food wrappers, no prints. The tires were deflated deliberately, and the license plates were gone. Whoever left it wanted it to stay hidden. It was the same model, the same color, even the same mud pattern from the creek. Like a message. "You won't find us twice." The truck was towed to the county impound. Inside the glove box, detectives found a folded map of Silver Creek County, rivers, caves, ridgelines, marked with a red pen. Every circle pointed deeper into the wilderness. The search began again, but it was smaller this time. No helicopters, no national headlines, just a few rangers and volunteers. They combed through the underbrush, called out the kids' names until their voices cracked. Nothing. It was like the forest itself had learned to keep their secret. By spring, the case went cold. The sheriff's office stopped issuing updates, and people moved on. The Grayson property was foreclosed. Rachel left her job at the grocery store and started appearing on local news stations, holding pictures of the kids, Ella, Logan, Sophie, their smiles printed in glossy ink that couldn't fade fast enough. She begged anyone who'd seen them to call. No one did. But the strange thing about Silver Creek is that rumors grow better than crops. People started whispering again. Some claimed to see a man with 3 children hiking near Cedar Bluff, collecting rainwater in buckets, or fishing with homemade rods. Others said they heard laughter echoing through the trees at dawn, followed by silence too sudden to be natural. Most of these stories were written off as imagination, the kind of talk that fills bar stools and hunting lodges. But one report caught the sheriff's attention. A woman hiking along the West Fork Trail swore she found an old campsite, a fire ring made of river stones, 3 sleeping mats woven from pine needles, and a tin can half buried in the mud. Inside it was a child's drawing, stick figures, 4 of them, holding hands under a big yellow sun. On the back was written, in clumsy letters, "We are safe here." The county didn't announce that find. They didn't want to stir up another frenzy. But for Rachel, who was quietly given a copy, it confirmed her fear. Noah wasn't lost. He was building a world out there, away from everyone, a private kingdom made of moss and secrecy. And the kids? They were his citizens. She filed another emergency petition for custody, hoping to strip him of parental rights, but the court couldn't serve papers to a man who didn't exist on paper anymore. For all legal purposes, Noah Grayson had become a ghost. Months passed. Then one evening, almost a year after his second disappearance, his parents woke up to a sound outside, footsteps on the porch. Noah. He came alone this time, hair longer, beard thicker, clothes dirty but intact. He didn't stay long, just enough to eat, shower, and say the words, "We are fine." When his mother asked where the children were, he said, "Not far," and smiled. He left before sunrise. Later, when detectives asked why they hadn't called the police, his father said quietly, "He's still my son." That was the last confirmed sighting for over a year. By then, the legend had taken shape. The press dubbed him the Ghost of Silver Creek. Podcasts debated whether he was a survivalist hero or an unfit father. Online forums drew maps of where he might be hiding, speculating about caves, abandoned ranger cabins, or secret networks of supporters. Some said he'd joined a militia. Others believed he'd found a way to live completely off the grid, teaching his kids to hunt, trap, and move through the woods like shadows. The truth was simpler and sadder. Noah wasn't leading a movement. He was running out of time. The wilderness might feed your pride, but it doesn't forgive mistakes. Winters in the Cascades are brutal. Rivers flood, animals migrate, and food disappears. As his supplies dwindled, desperation started to look a lot like defiance. And yet, no one saw him beg. Every now and then, a store in Ridgehaven or Prospect Hill would report small thefts, canned beans, batteries, rope. The security cameras caught nothing but blurs. The locals would say, half joking, "Guess Noah's shopping again." No one laughed too loud, because deep down, they weren't sure if he was the villain or the warning. By the second winter, Rachel's hair had started to grey. She stopped giving interviews. Every Christmas she hung 4 stockings, though one stayed folded in a drawer. She still believed he'd bring them home one day, maybe in spring, when the snow melted and the river thawed. But when the thaw came, the only thing the river brought was driftwood. And the legend of the Grayson family sank deeper into the roots of Silver Creek. They said if you hiked far enough up the Marrow Ridge Trail, you could hear children's voices echo between the pines, laughter carried by wind, fading as soon as you called back. Whether that was grief or truth, no one could say. But everyone knew one thing. Noah hadn't vanished into thin air. He had simply gone where the world couldn't follow. It had been nearly 2 years since Noah Grayson and his 3 children vanished into the forests of Silver Creek. 2 years without a trace. No sightings. No calls. No bodies. By then, the story had become a legend told in truck stops and barrooms all across Washington state. People didn't talk about Noah like a missing man anymore. They talked about him like a ghost. The father of Silver Creek, they called him. The man who outsmarted search teams, helicopters, and time itself. But legends always leave something out. The part where hunger sets in. Where survival starts to look a lot like crime. Spring of the second year brought heavy rains to the Pacific Northwest. Rivers swelled, roads turned to mud, and the forest, Noah's kingdom, began to rot from the inside out. Food grew scarce. The deer move higher into the hills, and even the trout that used to shimmer beneath the creek's surface seemed to vanish. By late April, desperation had replaced patience. Noah needed supplies, not just for him, but for the kids. That's when it happened. It was May 16, 20XY, a grey Tuesday morning in the small town of Prospect Hill, the kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked and news travels faster than the wind. At 9:07 a.m., the local community bank had just opened. 2 tellers, a manager, and 1 elderly customer. Nothing unusual. Then the front door burst open. 2 people walked in, faces hidden behind plain black masks, moving fast but not chaotic. One of them carried a sawed-off shotgun. The other was smaller, maybe a teenager. Witnesses said the taller one never yelled, never swore. He spoke calmly, almost politely. Nobody move. Nobody needs to get hurt. It was over in 3 minutes. They took less than $7,000, stuffed it into a canvas bag, and ran. As they jumped onto a stolen dirt bike, a single warning shot fired into the air, but it ricocheted, striking a bystander's leg. Nothing fatal, but enough to turn a robbery into something darker. By the time the first sirens echoed through town, they were already gone, swallowed again by the trees. For a few days, nobody connected it to the Silver Creek family. How could they? The idea that Noah Grayson, the quiet farmer, the missing father, had become an armed robber was too far-fetched even for rumor. But detectives always start with the details. The dirt bike had been stolen from a farm outside Ridgehaven, just 20 miles from where Noah grew up. The farm owner swore the thief knew his way around engines. The boot prints near the fence, one large, one small. And then came the security footage. It wasn't perfect, grainy, distant, the kind of footage that leaves more questions than answers. But one still frame stood out. A tall man in a faded green jacket with a distinct tear on the right shoulder, the same kind of jacket Noah was seen wearing the day he first disappeared. The second figure was smaller, slighter. Detectives guessed around 10 or 11 years old. That's when the story of the father of Silver Creek stopped being a mystery and became a manhunt. For Rachel Monroe, Noah's ex-wife, it was a new kind of grief. She had spent years begging people to find her children, and now she wasn't sure she wanted them found, not like this. When the news broke, reporters camped outside her house again. Flashbulbs, microphones, endless questions. Rachel stood on her porch, hands trembling, eyes red from sleepless nights. She said only one sentence. "If he's out there, please stop running before it's too late." Law enforcement began treating Silver Creek like enemy territory. They sent drones over the ridgelines, set up motion cameras on logging roads, and questioned anyone who'd ever lived off the grid. But Noah knew that land better than any of them. He'd grown up reading it like scripture, every trail, every blind spot, every hollow that hid from the sky. The police found evidence of movement but never the man himself. Campfire remains. Cans of beans burned black from overuse. A child's shoe half buried in moss. Each discovery felt more like a ghost note than a lead. 3 months later, in August, a new lead surfaced, this time not from the woods but from a hardware store in Ridgehaven. The place was called Timberline Supply, a local chain that sold everything from tools to seed packets. On a muggy afternoon, security cameras caught a man walking down the aisles wearing a dark beanie, glasses, and a medical mask. He pushed a cart filled with headlamps, water jugs, rubber boots, and gardening tools. 3 kids followed him closely, keeping their distance from everyone else. The store manager said she got chills watching the tape. They weren't scared, she said. They looked trained. When investigators reviewed the footage, there was no doubt it was Noah Grayson. And now, for the first time in years, they had proof the children were alive. Within 48 hours, a massive search operation swept across Silver Creek. Patrol cars, helicopters, even canine units. But Noah had a head start, nearly 2 years of knowing exactly how to vanish. His abandoned pickup was found near Cedar Bluff, again without license plates. The engine was still warm. Inside were receipts from Timberline Supply, a children's book, and a map marked with fresh red ink. The circles this time were tighter, closer to the western ridges, where the terrain broke into cliffs and caves. Detective reports later described the layout as a survival perimeter. He wasn't wandering anymore. He was living. That fall, sightings began to multiply. A man with a beard seen buying fuel from a remote gas station. A group of kids spotted fishing at dusk near Pine Hollow Creek. Each report was vague, sometimes days old, impossible to confirm. Still, the myth grew, this idea of a family living beyond civilization, surviving where others would starve. Some people even admired him. Locals started leaving food at trailheads, cans, blankets, toys, with notes that read for the Grayson kids. Others called it enabling. The sheriff called it treason. By the time winter returned, Noah's name was on every wanted list in the Pacific Northwest. Charges now included armed robbery, unlawful use of a firearm, and child endangerment. But none of that stopped him. He'd become too good at staying invisible. He moved camps every few weeks, never slept in the same place twice. He bartered with off-grid families and old hunters who didn't trust the government. And though no one could prove it, many believed he had help, people who saw him not as a criminal, but as a father fighting for his children in a broken world. Meanwhile, Rachel's life had narrowed to a single purpose: getting her kids back alive. She worked with private investigators, organized fundraisers, and even started an online petition demanding renewed search efforts. But as she told one interviewer, it's hard to find someone who doesn't want to be found. By year's end, the case was national news again. Documentaries, podcasts, endless speculation. But one thing was certain: the legend of the father of Silver Creek had changed forever. He wasn't just a father anymore, he was a fugitive. And with every step deeper into the woods, he was dragging his children further from the life they once knew. It had been almost 3 years since Noah Grayson and his children vanished into the wilderness. By then, their story had crossed from mystery into myth. For the locals of Silver Creek, the forest wasn't just trees and mist anymore, it was a living legend. Parents told their kids not to wander too far after dark, not because of bears or wolves, but because the Graysons are still out there. Some said they'd seen them moving through the pines at dusk. Others swore they heard laughter near the old trails, soft and human, fading the moment they called back. No one ever found proof. Until that October morning. The sun was barely up over the Cascade Rim, and the first frost of the season painted the ground in silver. A group of hunters, 3 men from nearby Ridgehaven, were tracking elk through the high country. They moved quietly, cameras mounted on their rifles, logging every step like they always did for safety. At 8:43 a.m., one of them, Ben Carver, stopped. "There," he whispered, pointing toward movement in the trees. Through the fog, a figure emerged. A man. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark, weather-stained clothes. Behind him, 3 children followed in single file, stepping exactly where he stepped. The camera kept rolling. The footage lasted less than 20 seconds, but it was enough. Enough to reignite the story, to wake the legend back into reality. When Ben turned the video over to authorities, the sheriff's office didn't believe it at first. They'd been burned too many times. Fake sightings, edited clips, hoaxes. But when they slowed the footage down, frame by frame, the truth was undeniable. The man's face was partially obscured by fog, but his build, his clothes, his stride, everything matched the last known images of Noah Grayson. And the children, older now, but still recognizable. Ella, Logan, Sophie. It wasn't just a rumor anymore. They were alive. Within hours, the sheriff called an emergency press conference. Standing under the pale fluorescent lights of the county building, he spoke carefully, choosing every word like it might break something fragile. "We have reason to believe that Noah Grayson and his children are still living in the wilderness near Silver Creek. We are working with state and federal agencies to locate them safely." For Rachel Monroe, the children's mother, it was the first good news in years. But even Joy, after that long, felt dangerous. She watched the footage over and over, the grainy clip of her kids walking through fog, and felt her stomach twist. They looked healthy, strong even, but also trained. They didn't look like children lost in the woods. They looked like children who belonged there. The following week, search teams moved in again. Helicopters scanned the ridge. Drones flew overhead, cutting through the morning fog like insects made of light. For the first time in years, Silver Creek wasn't silent. But Noah knew the land better than anyone searching for him. The rangers found campsites, recently used. Ash from fires still warm. Cans, ropes, pieces of top, footprints that vanished into riverbeds. They were always one step behind. A ranger later said, "He must have been watching us the whole time. You could feel it, eyes from somewhere you couldn't see." By the 5th day, The helicopters turned back. The dogs lost the scent near a creek bed that fed into a maze of ravines. Noah had outsmarted them again. Meanwhile, the video spread online like wildfire. Every news outlet ran it, headlines calling Noah the invisible father, the wild man of Silver Creek, the hermit fugitive. Comment sections split in half. Some saw him as a criminal, a man who'd stolen his kids and destroyed their futures. Others called him a hero, a father protecting his children from a broken world. Podcast hosts debated whether he was alive at all or just a ghost caught on camera. But the truth was much simpler and much sadder. Noah was still out there, and he was running out of time. The hunter's footage was more than just a sighting. It was proof of life. And that meant escalation. By winter, the case had been handed over to federal authorities. A task force was formed, made up of local deputies, state police, and federal marshals. Their goal wasn't just to find Noah. It was to bring the children back alive. Because now, officially, the Grayson case was being treated as child abduction. Rachel agreed to cooperate with the investigation, again. But this time, something was different in her voice. She didn't just want justice. She wanted peace. "I don't want him dead," she told the cameras. "I just want my kids to come home." As the investigation deepened, so did the mystery. Surveillance cameras from rural stores began picking up small clues. A man buying seeds and oil. A child's shoe in a thrift shop trash bin. Gas siphoned from a parked truck. Always within a 50-mile radius of Silver Creek. Each sign led nowhere concrete. Noah seemed to appear and disappear like smoke, always moving, always one step ahead. Detectives suspected he had help, maybe sympathetic locals who slip him supplies or information. But no one talked. In Silver Creek, silence had become tradition. By the start of the next summer, the $80,000 reward for information was renewed, this time with a twist. Anyone who'd helped Noah could come forward, return the children safely, and be granted full legal immunity. The message was clear: you don't have to be loyal anymore. Posters went up across the county. Flyers. Radio announcements. But no one called. And then came the press conference that changed everything. It was June 18th, the day of Ella's 12th birthday. Rachel Monroe stood in front of cameras outside the courthouse, holding her daughter's old photo in one hand and a handwritten letter in the other. Her voice trembled, but her words cut through the summer air like glass. They are just children. They don't belong out there. They deserve friends, a bed, a life. If anyone knows where my babies are, please, I am begging you, bring them home. Behind her, the courthouse flag flapped in the wind, its reflection trembling in a puddle left by morning rain. Reporters went silent. That clip would be replayed on television for weeks. And somewhere, deep in the woods, Noah must have seen it too. Because just a few months later, everything started to unravel. In late autumn, hunters once again reported strange noises near Marrow Ridge. Movement at night, smoke from distant fires, the echo of a child's cough in the still air. The task force returned to the area, armed with better technology, better maps, and a new sense of urgency. But this time, they weren't chasing ghosts. They were closing in on a man running out of places to hide. There's a certain kind of silence that only comes before a breaking point. A quiet so complete it feels like the forest is holding its breath. By late summer of 20XY+3, that was the kind of silence hanging over Silver Creek. 4 years had passed since Noah Grayson first disappeared with his 3 children, and though the legend of the father of Silver Creek had faded from national headlines, it had never truly left the valley. Locals still locked their doors at night. Hunters still claimed to see footprints too small to belong to man. And every now and then, a light would flicker deep in the woods, too steady to be lightning, too dim to be civilization. But on the night of September 8th, that silence finally broke. 2:30 a.m. The alarm went off at Redwood Farm Supply, a general goods store just off Highway 16. The owner, an older man named Walter Denning, lived above the shop. He came down half asleep, expecting maybe a raccoon or a drunk who'd lost his way. Instead, he saw 2 figures through the security glass, a man and a child, silhouettes against the dim light of the cash counter. The man moved quickly but carefully, checking corners like someone used to being hunted. The boy, smaller, maybe 12, gathered canned food and medical supplies, stuffing them into a pack. Denning froze. He didn't even reach for the phone. He knew who they were. Noah Grayson had come back to town. By the time the sheriff's deputies arrived, The pair were gone. Tire tracks, quad bike treads, fresh in the dirt, led north toward the logging roads. Inside the store, nothing was smashed.
No chaos, no vandalism.
Just food, batteries, and rope missing from the shelves. But for investigators, that was enough. They'd been chasing Noah for years, and this time they were close. 3:10 a.m. Deputy Eli Turner, the same officer who'd first issued the Grayson warrant years before, was patrolling the outskirts when a radio call came through. Suspect seen heading north on Pine Hollow Trail. Possibly armed. Child present. Turner knew those roads, narrow, twisting paths barely wide enough for a single vehicle. He also knew how they ended, in a maze of switchbacks that led nowhere but deeper into the Cascades. He called for backup, then pulled over near the ridge, laying down a strip of road spikes across the gravel path. The night was cold, the air thick with fog. He waited. At 3:28 a.m., the sound came, a low mechanical growl echoing through the trees. The quad bike appeared from the darkness, its single headlight cutting through the mist. 2 riders. The man in front, the child behind him, clinging tight. They didn't see the spikes until it was too late. The tires burst, the vehicle swerved violently, metal grinding against stone before crashing into the ditch. Noah leapt up instantly, pulling the boy behind cover. Then, silence. Turner stepped from his cruiser, flashlight raised. "Noah," he shouted. "It's over. You don't have to run anymore." The reply came from the dark, calm, low, almost sorrowful. "You don't understand, Deputy. I never ran. I just didn't stop walking." What happened next remains a blur even in official reports. A flash. A sound like thunder cracking through fog. Turner fell, hit twice, shoulder and cheek, before he could reach for his radio. He would later survive, but his world went black that night. The other units arrived minutes later. They found Turner bleeding but alive, and Noah's trail leading north toward Marrow Creek Ravine. The chase was on. 4 hours, the forest lit up with red and blue flashes as search teams closed in. Helicopters hovered over ridgelines, their spotlights sweeping through the mist like ghostly fingers. And for the first time, Noah didn't vanish. He was cornered. At 5:12 a.m., they found the quad bike, abandoned near a cluster of cedar trees, still warm. A trail of footprints led deeper into the woods. The air was wet and heavy with dawn fog. The deputies moved in slowly, calling his name, each step cracking twigs loud enough to make their hearts skip. Then, from the shadows, another gunshot. The team ducked for cover, returning fire into the trees. When the smoke cleared, it was over. Noah Grayson lay on the forest floor, rifle still slung across his shoulder, his eyes half open, staring at the pale morning light breaking through the branches. The boy beside him, Logan, was unharmed. Shaken. Silent. He whispered only 2 words. He told me, "Run." What came next unfolded like a slow exhale after years of holding breath. By sunrise, officers found the makeshift campsite just 2 kilometers away, hidden behind a ridge, accessible only by a narrow animal path. Inside, a small fire pit, a top shelter, jars of preserved berries, and 2 other children, Ella and Sophie, alive and alert, though frightened by the commotion. One of them, Ella, was holding a small hunting rifle, standing guard just as her father had taught her. When the officers approached, she froze, unsure whether to drop it or run. A crisis negotiator crouched low, voice steady and warm. "You're safe now," he said. After a long pause, she lowered the gun. And just like that, 4 years of hiding ended in one morning of rain and smoke. News traveled faster than anyone could control. By noon, every major outlet in the state had the story. The father of Silver Creek killed in shootout, children found alive. Camera crews swarmed the county line. Helicopters circled overhead. The old Grayson farmhouse filled with relatives, reporters, and government officials all asking the same question. How had he kept them alive for so long? The answer came in fragments, notes, journals, scraps of hand-drawn maps found in the camp. They showed a man who planned everything: water routes, shelter rotations, seasons of edible plants. Noah hadn't been lost. He'd been preparing. But preparation couldn't protect him from inevitability. In the days that followed, Rachel Monroe was reunited with her children. The moment was quiet. No flashing cameras, no headlines, just tears and the sound of kids breathing for the first time without fear. The authorities called it a rescue. Rachel called it something else. Maybe, she said softly, it was a release. Because what Noah had built wasn't just a refuge from society, it was a prison made of love and fear. He'd wanted to protect them from the world, but in the end, he'd only taught them how to live without it. Deputy Turner survived his wounds but lost sight in one eye. He gave one final interview months later. When asked if he hated Noah Grayson, he shook his head.
No.
He just went too far down a road he couldn't turn back from. Some of us chase freedom until we forget what it costs. And so the forest grew quiet again. The ashes of the last camp disappeared under moss and rain. Birdsong returned to the valleys. But the story stayed. Passed down in whispers, retold in podcasts and documentaries, argued over in forums by people who never saw the fog or smelled the cedar trees. To them, it was a mystery solved. To the people of Silver Creek, it was something else, a warning. Because somewhere between love and obsession, survival and surrender, Noah Grayson had built his own kind of wilderness. And for 4 years, he'd called it home. When the gunfire faded and the fog settled, Silver Creek returned to silence. For the first time in 4 years, the forest no longer had eyes watching from within it. But what remained, the camp, the notes, the traces of a man who tried to live outside time, told a story more complex than anyone expected. Because while the world called Noah Grayson a criminal, the pages he left behind painted him as something else, a father, lost between love and madness. The search team that combed through the campsite found more than sleeping bags and empty cans. Inside a waterproof tin box buried under the roots of a cedar tree were 13 notebooks, wrapped in oiled cloth, protected like treasure. The first page of the top one was dated December 12, 20XY, the day after his first disappearance. In smudged handwriting, it began, "If they ever find this, tell Rachel I didn't take them to run. I took them to remember how to live." From that line alone, investigators knew these weren't just journals. They were his final confession. The notebooks were sent to a forensics lab in Tacoma. Each page was damp, but legible, a man's life written in fragments, lessons for his children, lists of plants, maps of creeks, and entries that blurred between diary and prayer. One note read, "The woods don't lie. The trees never ask why. Out here, the only law is the weather, and it treats us all the same." Another said, "They told me I was unstable. Maybe they were right. But the world they live in feels sicker than anything I've seen in these woods." The FBI didn't care much for philosophy. They were looking for clues. But for Rachel Monroe, who was given digital copies of the journals, those words cut deeper than any report ever could. Rachel read them alone, sitting by the window of her small house in Everbrook, the same one she'd lived in before everything fell apart. The afternoon light flickered across the pages as she whispered parts of his writing aloud, as if reading to ghosts. One entry broke her completely. Sophie woke coughing again. "I don't have her medicine anymore. I can't let her see me scared. I tell her the wind makes her lungs hurt. Maybe she believes it. Maybe I do too." It wasn't madness she saw in those lines. It was desperation. A man trapped by his own decision, too proud to turn back, too scared to admit he was wrong. In another entry, he wrote, "If something happens to me, the kids know the trails. Ella can read maps. Logan knows how to fish. Sophie knows how to pray. Maybe that's enough." Rachel folded the page and pressed it to her chest, as if she could feel his heartbeat through the paper. But the most haunting discovery wasn't in the journals themselves. It was in a small sealed envelope tucked inside the last one. On the front, in faded pencil, were 4 words. "For my children, one day." Inside were 3 letters, one for each child. Short, handwritten in uneven ink, each one beginning the same way. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't come back." He told Ella she was the compass of the family. He told Logan he was strong enough to carry the silence. And to Sophie, the youngest, he wrote, "The world will scare you. Let it. Fear means you're alive. Just promise me you'll keep your heart soft." The letters were turned over to child counselors and psychologists working with the siblings, who were still adjusting to life outside the forest. They had lived nearly half their lives off the grid. Their first weeks back were filled with confusion, fluorescent lights that hurt their eyes, food that came from stores, not from soil. They didn't understand school schedules or traffic lights or why everyone talks so fast. But they did understand silence. They knew how to listen. The media, of course, devoured every detail. News anchors called the journals a window into the mind of a modern-day hermit. Documentaries used excerpts over slow piano music, trying to turn tragedy into myth. But the people who'd actually known Noah, the ones who grew up with him, worked beside him, drank beer with him at the town bar before everything changed, said something simpler. He wasn't crazy. He was just tired of noise. And in a world that seemed to get louder every year, that didn't sound so far-fetched. The investigation officially closed 6 months later. No criminal charges were filed against anyone suspected of helping him. The sheriff called it a case of survival gone too far. But privately, some of the officers admitted that part of them respected what he'd pulled off. 4 years in the wild, 3 children alive, and not a single trail camera had caught him until the end. In one of his notes, he'd written, "You can hide from people, but you can't hide from time. Every sunrise finds you, no matter how deep the woods." Those words now rest in a glass case inside the Silver Creek Historical Museum, the same building that once housed the sheriff's office. Tourists visit it every summer, taking photos of his maps, his tools, his journals, all labeled neatly under glass. For some, he's a criminal. For others, a folk hero. But for Rachel, he's still just the man who used to fix fences, make pancakes on Sundays, and hum lullabies under his breath. A year after the case closed, Rachel took the kids back to Silver Creek for the first time. It was spring, the river was swollen, the air heavy with pine and wet soil. They stopped at the place where the final campsite had been, now just an empty clearing dotted with wildflowers. Sophie held her mother's hand tightly. Logan wandered near the creek, poking at stones. Ella stood quietly, holding one of her father's old maps folded in half. She pointed to a note scribbled on the edge of the map, in his handwriting. It read, "Home is wherever you stop running." Rachel didn't say anything. She just watched as her children placed 3 small stones side by side near the water, one for him, one for the years they lost, and one for what they still had left. The wind carried the smell of cedar and rain. For a moment, it sounded like breathing. When the family drove back toward town, the valley opened up behind them, green, endless, and calm. The camera crews were gone. The story had finally finished telling itself. But if you drive down Highway 16 at dusk, the locals will tell you that sometimes, when the fog rolls over the trees just right, you can still see a flicker of light deep inside the forest. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's memory. Or maybe, just maybe, it's the echo of a man who wanted to live by his own rules. And the forest, in its quiet mercy, decided to remember him. Time moves differently after a tragedy. For most people, it heals, slowly, unevenly, like moss growing back over burned ground. But for the Grayson children, time didn't heal. It reintroduced itself. When the 3 of them, Ella, Logan, and Sophie, stepped out of the forest that last morning, blinking into the flash of police lights and the cold sunlight of civilization, it was like waking up in a world that had been waiting for them. Only, they didn't recognize it anymore. It's been 2 years since the Silver Creek incident ended. 2 years since their father, Noah Grayson, was found in that final stand among the pines. But his story didn't stop there. It lived on, in the way people whispered his name, in the way journalists debated his sanity, in the way the kids tried to learn what normal even meant. The world had turned their father into an icon, but for them, he was still just Dad, the man who taught them to fish by listening to the river, who said you could tell direction by how trees leaned toward the light. The same man who lied to them about why the world had to be left behind. The state placed them in therapy immediately. There were counselors, social workers, child psychologists, people who spoke gently, as if every word might shatter something invisible. But there was one question no one could answer. Who were they, now that he was gone? Ella, the oldest, adapted first. She was sharp, disciplined, observant. Traits her father had taught her to survive, not socialize. At 14, she was already reading survival manuals and crime reports, trying to understand him from the outside, like a detective studying a suspect she once loved. "I want to know where he stopped being right," she said in one interview. Because he was right about a lot of things. Until he wasn't. Logan, on the other hand, carried silence like armor. He didn't speak about the forest. He didn't talk about that night. He just drew endless sketches of trees, maps, animals. Sometimes, without realizing, he drew their old campsite, the one by the creek, down to every rock and branch. And Sophie, the youngest, didn't remember much at all. She had flashes, the smell of rain, the sound of boots in mud, the warmth of a fire. But when people asked about her dad, she just said, he used to hum when it got too quiet. 4 months, the children lived under protective supervision with relatives outside Tacoma. Reporters kept calling. One even offered them money to appear in a documentary. Rachel, their mother, refused. She told them, the story's been told enough. Now it's time to live it down. But the truth was, the story refused to die. Podcasts, YouTube channels, new specials, all dissected the same questions. Was Noah a villain or a victim? Did he kidnap his children or rescue them from something worse? Was he a survivalist, a zealot, or a father who simply broke under pressure? Each theory contradicted the next, each expert more certain than the last. Meanwhile, the 3 kids who'd actually lived sat in a small rented house trying to figure out algebra, bus routes, and how to make friends without talking about who their father was. By the first anniversary of Noah's death, Rachel had taken them back to Silver Creek. Not for a ceremony, for closure. It was autumn again, and the trees looked almost identical to the way they had the morning the search teams carried the children out of the woods. They walked the old trail leading to the clearing, the one the media called the last camp. The path was overgrown, branches reclaiming the ground, the forest whispering as if recognizing them. When they reached the creek, Ella stopped. She pulled from her backpack a small notebook, the same one they'd found buried in the tin box. It was one of Noah's, but this one was blank inside. She had written her own words on the first page. For 4 years, the forest kept us alive. For the rest of our lives, we'll have to remember how to live outside it. She placed the notebook in a hollow at the base of a cedar tree and covered it with a few leaves, not as a memorial, but as a balance. Something left behind, to replace what was taken. Logan said nothing. He just placed one of his drawings next to it, a map of Silver Creek, traced by memory. Sophie added a single wildflower, yellow and trembling in the wind. Then they walked away. Later that evening, Rachel sat with them by the riverbank near town. The water shimmered under the fading light. You don't have to forgive him, she said quietly. But you do have to understand him. People break in different ways. Your father's way was just bigger than most. Ella nodded but didn't answer. She stared at the reflection of the forest in the water and whispered, he didn't want to disappear. He wanted to prove he could live without anyone. Then after a pause, but no one can. Rachel reached for her hand, and for once, Ella didn't pull away. Over the next few years, life began to piece itself together, not perfectly, but enough. Sophie started school full-time and joined the local choir. Logan took to woodwork, building birdhouses behind their home, each one numbered and signed LG. And Ella, now a high school senior, was planning to study criminology. When asked why, she said, because sometimes good people do bad things for good reasons, and I want to know where the line really is. Her counselor said she spoke about her father less and less, but her essays told a different story. In one of them, she wrote, the forest was never the prison. It was the truth, quiet, unforgiving, and honest. It's the world outside that lies. In Silver Creek, life went on. The story of Noah Grayson had turned into something halfway between folklore and cautionary tale. Locals told visitors, don't stray too far past the ridge, that's Grayson's ground. But on quiet nights, when the fog rolled in and the air smelled of cedar, you could sometimes hear a low hum in the distance, the kind of sound a father might make while putting his kids to sleep under an open sky. Whether it was memory, imagination, or just the wind moving through the trees, no one could say. One last piece of the puzzle surfaced a year later. A park ranger discovered a small metal locket near the creek. Inside was a faded photo of Rachel and the kids, torn from an old family picture. On the back, scratched faintly with a knife, was one word. Home. No one knows when Noah left it there, before he died, or years earlier, hoping someone would find it. Either way, it was the final echo of a man whose story had always been about one thing, finding home, even when he no longer knew where it was. In the end, every wilderness is just a mirror. It shows you what's left when everything else is gone. For Noah Grayson, it showed love and madness, courage and fear. For his children, it showed resilience, the kind that grows in silence. And for the rest of us, maybe it shows that no matter how far you run, every path eventually leads back to the same place, the need to be found. It had been 10 years since the forest went quiet. 10 years since the headlines faded, the cameras left, and the story of the father of Silver Creek became just another legend told over small-town coffee counters. But some stories don't end when the world stops watching. They keep breathing in the people who live them. And now, after a decade of silence, Ella Grayson was coming back. The road into Silver Creek hadn't changed much. Same cracked asphalt, same winding turns between the fir trees. But to Ella, it felt smaller somehow, like the town had aged while she'd been gone. The sign at the county line still read Population 642, though she knew that number was a lie. The ones who'd left never really came back. She rolled down the car window as the autumn wind cut through. Pine, smoke, and faint rain. It was the same smell she remembered from childhood, the same one that used to mean home. Except now she wasn't here as Noah Grayson's daughter. She was here as Detective Ella Monroe, guest speaker for the Silver Creek Memorial Symposium, an event held every year to honor the people and lessons behind the town's history. This year, they'd ask her to speak about her father. The town hall was small, wood-paneled walls, folding chairs, the faint buzz of old ceiling lights. Local faces filled the seats, people who'd searched for her as a child, neighbors who once whispered behind their hands. At the front stood a framed photograph of her father, Noah, smiling faintly in better days, back before everything went wrong. The photo was flanked by 2 candles and a single white flower. When Ella stepped up to the podium, the microphone squeaked, breaking the stillness. She took a breath, her voice steady but low. Most of you remember the story. You lived it. The man who disappeared into the woods with his kids, and didn't come out. You know what the newspapers called him, but you don't know what it was like to love him. The crowd didn't move. No shuffling, no whispers. Just the soft hum of the lights overhead. For a long time, I thought my father was running from something. The law, my mother, the noise of the world. But after all these years, I think maybe he was running toward something, a version of peace he couldn't find anywhere else. After the speech, a woman from the back of the hall approached her, Sheriff Martha Lang, now in her 60s, retired but still carrying herself like she could outshoot anyone in the room. She handed Ella a small sealed envelope, yellowed with age. "We found this years ago," Martha said. "Hidden in evidence storage. It was marked for you. We weren't sure you'd ever want it." Inside was a single folded note, written in her father's familiar handwriting. "For Ella. When you're old enough to see the world without fear, you'll understand why I couldn't live in it. But if you're reading this, it means you did. So maybe there's still hope for both of us." She folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her coat pocket, her throat tight. That evening, Ella drove back out toward Marrow Creek, the place where it all ended. The path was rough, half reclaimed by ferns and moss, but she knew it by heart. The forest looked gentler now, smaller, even. Sunlight filtered through in soft orange patches, birds darted between branches. But every sound, a snapping twig, the rustle of leaves, still made her heart jump. When she reached the old clearing, she stopped. There was nothing left of the camp, no top, no ashes, no sign of the life they'd built there. Only a ring of wildflowers where the fire pit used to be. She crouched down and brushed her fingers through the grass. Beneath the soil, she felt the faint edges of something metal. A tin box. Rusty, almost falling apart. Inside, water-stained pages, maps, drawings, and one final note. "If you find this, then the woods have given it back. Don't be angry at me. I didn't mean to steal your childhood. I just didn't know how to protect it." For the first time in years, Ella let herself cry. Not the quiet tears of guilt or confusion, but the kind that come from finally understanding something that used to feel impossible. The next morning, she met with her younger siblings, Logan and Sophie, at the old diner on Main Street. Logan was taller now, broad-shouldered and calm, working as a carpenter in Portland. Sophie was studying environmental science, fascinated by the wilderness that had once been her prison. They hadn't all been together in years. The conversation started awkwardly, small talk, polite questions, but eventually turned to the one thing they all shared, their father. Sophie took a sip of her coffee and said softly, "Do you ever miss it? The forest?" Logan nodded. "Sometimes. Not the fear. Just the quiet. The way everything made sense out there." Ella smiled faintly. "Yeah. Dad used to say the trees don't lie. Guess he was right about that." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the clatter of dishes and the sound of the rain outside. Finally, Ella reached into her coat and set the folded letter on the table. "He left this for us," she said. "For me, technically. But I think he meant all of us." They unfolded it together. And for a few minutes, it was like he was there again, not as a fugitive or a legend, but as the man who taught them how to listen to wind, how to find north by sunlight, how to trust each other when the world didn't make sense. Later that day, the three of them drove to the overlook above the valley. From there, Silver Creek shimmered below, a thread of light cutting through the forest. They didn't speak much. They didn't have to. Logan placed a small wooden carving on the guardrail, a hand-carved figure of a man with a pack and 3 children behind him, walking into the trees. Sophie whispered something only the wind could hear, and Ella just closed her eyes, letting the air move through her hair, the sound of the creek far below echoing like memory. "He's not in the forest anymore," she said quietly. "He's in us. The part that still believes we can be better than our mistakes." That night, Ella checked into the small motel on the edge of town. Before turning in, she looked out the window toward the dark line of the trees. In the moonlight, mist drifted over the valley like smoke. For a split second, she thought she saw movement, a flicker of a figure in the clearing, walking toward the water. But when she blinked, it was gone. Maybe it was just the fog. Or maybe, as she'd always suspected, the forest never really let go of those who loved it too much. They say every story has an ending. But in Silver Creek, endings have a way of changing shape. Like fog in the valley, they shift when the light hits them differently. 10 years after Noah Grayson's death, his story was supposed to be finished. His children had grown. His name had faded from headlines. The forest had reclaimed his footprints. And yet, one rainy November morning, a new piece of the puzzle surfaced, something no one expected to find. It began when a documentary crew from Seattle came to Silver Creek. They weren't the first. Over the years, the story had been picked apart by journalists, filmmakers, and amateur investigators, all looking for their version of the truth. But this team was different. They weren't chasing mystery. They were chasing proof. Led by producer Maya Hensley, they'd been filming a documentary titled Into the Quiet, The Father of Silver Creek Revisited. Their goal was simple: revisit the myths, speak to locals, and separate rumor from reality. What they found instead would rewrite everything. On November 14th, while filming near Marrow Creek Ridge, one of the crew members, a sound technician named Dylan Ward, noticed something odd wedged between 2 rocks by the water line. It was small, rectangular, and coated in mud, a weatherproof trail camera, the kind hunters used. Its casing was cracked but intact. The logo was almost invisible under the rust. They assumed it belonged to a hunter, until they saw the initials carved faintly into the side. NG. Noah Grayson. The local sheriff's office took custody of the device immediately. It took 2 days to carefully dry and open it. And against all odds, the SD card inside was still readable. When investigators plugged it in, there were 37 video files. The first few were blank, empty forest scenes, wind and branches, the hum of insects. But then came the final file, timestamped September 7th, the night before Noah was killed. What it captured would soon become the most debated 17 minutes of footage in modern true crime history. The video opened with the sound of rain hitting the canopy. The camera faced a clearing lit by a small campfire. Noah sat near it, his rifle leaning against a tree, his face lit by the flicker of orange light. He looked older than any of the photos the world remembered. Thinner, more tired, but calm. His voice was low, steady. "I don't know if anyone will ever see this. Maybe it's better that way. But if they do, I want them to know it wasn't hate that brought us here." He paused, glancing off camera where the faint laughter of children could be heard. It was love. Just too much of it. The camera stayed fixed as he spoke, about the noise of the world, about fear, about how he'd lost trust in the systems meant to protect his family. "They said I was unstable. Maybe I was. But the world keeps getting louder, and people stop listening. Out here, I could finally hear my kids breathe." He looked directly into the lens, rain glistening in his beard. "If you're watching this, it means they're safe. That's all that matters." Then, silence, for nearly 30 seconds. Only the sound of rain and fire. Noah leaned forward, whispering something that almost got lost under the crackle of wood. "Tomorrow, I'll go for supplies. I think they're close. If they find me, tell Rachel I wasn't trying to disappear. I was trying to remember who we were before the world told us what we had to be. The video ended with the camera slowly shifting, as if he'd picked it up to move it. A brief blur of trees, a flash of a child's hand reaching out toward the lens, then static. When the footage was released to the public 6 weeks later, it reignited the case overnight. True crime forums, Reddit threads, and media outlets exploded with theories. Some called it a confession. Others said it was a goodbye. But the most haunting question was this: had Noah known he wasn't coming back? For Ella, Logan, and Sophie, the footage reopened old wounds they thought had healed. The documentary team reached out to them for comment, but Ella refused every interview. Still, when the video aired, she watched. Alone. The flickering light on his face, the way his eyes darted to the edge of the frame when his children laughed, it wasn't the image of a monster. It was a father at the end of something he didn't know how to stop. She played the line over and over again. It was love. Just too much of it. And in that one sentence, she understood something that years of therapy and analysis couldn't explain. Her father hadn't been running from the world. He'd been trying to rebuild it in his own flawed, impossible way. The discovery also revealed a smaller detail almost everyone missed. At the end of the final video, just before the static, a faint sound could be heard, a vehicle engine in the distance. The timestamp placed it at 2:21 a.m., roughly 1 hour before the break-in at Redwood Farm Supply. That meant Noah hadn't been desperate that night. He'd been preparing. Police records later confirmed that supplies matching those in the footage, canned goods, rope, and medical gauze, were found untouched at his camp. He never got the chance to return for them. That small discovery reframed the ending. What had looked like chaos was, in fact, the last act of a man who still believed he could fix what was broken. By spring, the documentary aired on national television. Its closing scene mirrored the opening shot. The same forest, same creek, only now silent again. A voiceover, Ella's voice, closed the film. Some people live their whole lives trying to be seen. My father spent his trying to disappear. But maybe the truth isn't about choosing one or the other. Maybe it's about learning when to come back. In the months that followed, the Grayson family started a foundation, the Silver Creek Project, dedicated to mental health outreach and wilderness safety education. It wasn't about redemption. It was about balance, a way to turn tragedy into something alive. The forest where Noah once hid became a conservation area. Visitors often said it felt calm there, not eerie, not haunted, just still. And if you stood by the river at dusk, you could hear the water rushing over stones like a whisper, low and endless. In the end, the forgotten footage didn't solve the mystery. It didn't justify or condemn him. It simply reminded everyone that truth isn't clean. It's messy, human, and often found in the spaces between guilt and grace. Noah Grayson's story was never about escape. It was about the cost of trying to make silence mean safety. And maybe the real wilderness isn't in the forest. It's in us, every time we try to hide from the things we can't forgive. For years, the camera footage was thought to be the final word in the story of Noah Grayson. The world believed it had heard everything he had to say, his motives, his fears, his goodbye. But the truth, like the forest, still had layers. And buried beneath the noise of documentaries and theories, there was something else. Something no one had ever played until now. A voice. His voice. It started quietly, with a letter, not a discovery. In the fall of 20XY+14, Ella Grayson received an envelope from the Silver Creek Historical Archives. Inside was a short note from a retired ranger who'd been part of the original investigation. Miss Grayson. While cataloguing old evidence, we found an audio cassette labeled NG, September 7th. It was stored with recovered items from Marrow Creek Ridge. We believe it belonged to your father. It's yours if you wish to claim it. For 2 weeks, Ella didn't open the box. She kept it sealed, sitting on her desk, afraid of what might be inside, afraid it might close the last door she still had opened to him. Finally, one cold evening, she did. The cassette was simple, black, faded, cracked at one corner. A label across the front read in shaky handwriting, "For them, if it matters." Ella borrowed an old tape player from her office. She pressed play. At first, there was static. Then, a breath, a low, weary inhale. And then came the voice she hadn't heard in over a decade. "It's me, Noah." The sound was rough, distant, like it had been recorded inside a tent. Rain pattered faintly in the background. I don't know if anyone will ever listen to this. Maybe I hope they don't. But if they do, if it's you, Ella, Logan, or Sophie, I guess this is the part one never got to say. He paused. The sound of wind moved through the MIC. I didn't run because I hated the world. I ran because I couldn't trust myself in it anymore. As the tape played, Ella sat frozen. Every word was heavy, not an explanation, but something more complicated. The voice of a man trying to build a confession and a prayer at the same time. Noah spoke about the years before the forest, the custody fights, the nights he couldn't sleep. He talked about the noise, not literal noise, but the kind that crawls into your thoughts and doesn't leave. Everyone says the woods are silent. They are not. They hum, like the earth is breathing. It's the only sound that ever made sense to me. He coughed, a small, tired sound. If they find this, tell the kids I didn't teach them to hide. I taught them to listen. Because the world gets loud enough to make you forget who you are. The tape continued for 24 minutes. In the middle, his tone shifted, less confessional, more protective. He started speaking to his children. Ella, you were always the compass. You read maps like they were poems. I knew you'd find your way back one day, even if I didn't. Logan, you think in quiet. Don't ever let anyone mistake that for weakness. There's strength in silence. You saved me more than once, even when you didn't know it. Sophie, you were the light. Every time you laughed, I remembered what hope sounded like. He paused. And then, his voice cracked slightly. If I ever made you afraid, I'm sorry. I was trying to build a world where you wouldn't have to be. I just forgot that sometimes the cage looks like safety. Ella pressed pause. Her hand shook. She couldn't listen to the rest, not yet. She sat there in the half-lit room, the cassette turning silently inside the player, the sound of the past circling through magnetic tape. For the first time since his death, she didn't feel anger. Not forgiveness either. Just understanding. That strange middle ground where grief stops arguing and finally starts listening. When she finally played the second half, Noah's tone had changed again. It was quieter. More reflective. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Maybe I'll make it back. Maybe I won't. But if I don't, I want you to remember one thing. He paused, breathing shallow but steady. Don't build walls around the things that scare you. Walk through them. The world's got sharp edges, but so do we. We just forget that we were built to survive. A soft thump followed, maybe him setting the recorder down. The fire crackled. Rain hit the canvas of the tent hard now. The truth is, I'm tired. Not of the forest, not of the quiet, just of being something I don't understand anymore. If they find me, I hope they're kind. And then, in the final seconds, his voice softened almost to a whisper. Tell Rachel I never stopped loving her. I just didn't know how to love her from the world we were in. Static filled the rest. Then, a faint click. The tape ended. When the recording leaked a month later, it spread across every news outlet. Some called it a final confession. Others said it was redemption. But for Ella, it wasn't either. It was just him. The voice of a man she'd spent her whole life trying to understand finally sounding human again. The documentary crew later used the recording as the closing sequence of The Father of Silver Creek, Legacy. In the film, Noah's voice plays over shots of the forest, the same trails, the same creek, only now quiet and green with new growth. As his voice fades, Ella's narration begins. He didn't ask to be forgiven. He just wanted to be heard. Maybe that's all any of us want, to know that our silence meant something. The screen cut to black with the sound of wind moving through trees, the same rhythm that once guided them through the wilderness. A year later, the Silver Creek Project installed a memorial at the edge of Marrow Creek, a small stone engraved with his own words. The world gets loud. Listen anyway. Visitors often said the place felt peaceful, not haunted, like the forest itself had finally exhaled. Some stories don't end when the final word is spoken. They live on in echoes, in voices recorded in rain, in memories carried by the wind. Noah Grayson's story wasn't about vanishing. It was about returning, again and again, until the silence finally made sense. And maybe that's what redemption really is. Not the world forgiving you, but you forgiving the world.